Welcome to HEC-TV's live interactive program that's part of St. Louis.
The whole production is pulled together.
It's going to be a steel bridge.
On the American classic novel,
The car that put America on wheels.
Welcome to HEC-TV Live. Today on HEC-TV Live, it's Shakespeare Outdoors, Hamlet. Hi everybody, I'm Tim Gore, your host for HEC-TV Live. I'm very happy to welcome you to Forest Park, where in just a couple of weeks, on May 28th, the Shakespeare Festival of St. Louis will be opening its 10th production, and this year they're doing Hamlet. Behind me you see the set that's being built for the production, and there will be thousands of people here for about 3.5 weeks in May and June, a free festival of Shakespeare that happens every year in St. Louis in the middle of Forest Park. As of course is always true of outdoor theater, you're never exactly sure what the weather is going to be like, and it's not a bright, beautiful sunny day, but it is a nice gray day, which I understand is really good for our cameras, I hear. And the rains have decided to hold off, and we're going to have the opportunity to interact with everybody this morning as we learn about Hamlet, the play, the character. Remember, if you're watching us on TV or over the internet, you can email us your questions to live@hectv.org. That's live@hectv.org. As always with interactive programming, we've got video conference schools joining us from across the country. I'm going to come to each of you guys in just a moment to introduce yourselves and also to make sure that you're connected well to the bridge. But first I want to introduce the guests who are going to be with us this morning. So I'll ask Rick and Chris to come in and join us. Thanks so much for being here, gentlemen. Thanks so much. To my immediate left is Rick Dildine, the Executive Director of the Shakespeare Festival, and to his left is Chris Limber, the Education Director of the Festival. And Rick, let's start just a little bit with a history of the Shakespeare Festival. This is your 10th production. What's the size, the scale? Why do we do this thing in St. Louis?
Well, this is our 10th year. About 10 years ago, a group of citizens got together and said, let's do a free Shakespeare Festival. There are about 100 Shakespeare festivals across the country, 13 of which are free. We're one of those. And we produced a very high quality, totally professional play out here in Forest Park. Anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 people will see the show a night. We have 18 actors, professional actors that are in the show. We average about 40 to 45,000 people a summer come see the show.
Wow. And Chris, Education Director, there's more to the Shakespeare Festival than just what happens here in these 3.5 weeks. Talk a little bit about the educational outreach.
Well, we have programs that run all year long and provide opportunities for students of all ages to learn about Shakespeare, to discover his literature, to perform Shakespeare. We have a touring ensemble that reaches almost 125 different locations, mostly schools, but also some community venues. We do 2 50-minute Shakespeare plays that are good for schools. And we also have classes. We do a program for high schools called Metro Youth Shakespeare, where we bring together 10 different schools. We had 85 high school students performing Hamlet back in March. It was very exciting.
Very cool.
So those programs go all year long.
And the website is shakespearefestival.org? Or
ShakespeareFestivalSt.Louis.org.
ShakespeareFestivalSt.Louis.org, where you'll find all sorts of curriculum materials related to not just this production, but the productions they've also done in the past. Let's take this opportunity to make sure that our interactive student groups have joined us. We're going to go first to Holt High School out in Wentzville. Holt, unmute your microphone, come in and say hello, and let me make sure you're there.
Hello.
Hello, Holt. It's really glad to have you guys. It's really glad to have you guys join us again. We'll be coming to you with your ideas about Hamlet and Shakespeare in a little bit. So I want you to be thinking in terms of some burning questions you have about either Hamlet or Shakespeare, or some information you know about Hamlet or Shakespeare that you want to share. We'll be coming back to that. Let's go up to Vermont, Fairhaven, Vermont. Go ahead, unmute your microphone, come in and say hello. Hello, Fairhaven. It's good to connect with you. We'll get back to you, and let's go up to Beaver Falls, New York. Beaver Falls, if you're there, unmute your microphone and say hello.
How you doing?
Really good, thanks. How are you guys doing in Beaver Falls?
We're doing great. We do not have a high school class. Our high school class bailed on us, so my 5th graders will be watching this.
Oh, that'll be perfect. Well, excellent. We'll be happy to have them join us. And if you guys have some questions, we certainly are going to be welcoming your questions throughout the program as well. So Beaver Falls, we look forward to that. We'll let you guys mute your microphone too. And before we begin to interact with those groups, let's talk a little bit about your background, because you're both not just executive directors and education directors, you're actors yourselves. Rick, how did you get to all this?
I started out as an actor in junior high, started working, did summer camps, theater, and started and stuck with it, got 2 degrees in acting. and pursued a career in acting, and that kept leading to directing and stage management, and now full-time as a producer as
Very
well.
cool. And Chris?
I started out as an actor. I have a degree in acting, and worked as an actor professionally for about 15 years, and then started to branch out into writing mostly plays for young people and composing music, and also did teaching all along the way. And so this is kind of a wonderful synthesis of all those activities, being the education director.
Well, we're going to spend a good deal of time today obviously talking about what is maybe the most important role in the history of the English-speaking
Yes,
world,
yes.
Hamlet. At least that's what people say, the most important role in the history of the English-speaking world. And I want to start by seeing what our student groups might know about Hamlet. Holt, you can feel free to unmute your microphone. Is there a thing or two you'd like to share about the character of Hamlet or the play of Hamlet that you know, something you find intriguing and fascinating? Go ahead and offer that to everybody.
We'd like to ask you how you plan to modernize Hamlet to appeal to younger audiences.
Oh, very good question. Okay, we'll talk about that to start with then. The question deals with modernizing Hamlet. Is this, are you planning on modernizing Hamlet to deal with today's production? Is this a very traditional production? What?
Yeah, I mean, we set out to, what was most important for us was to tell a very clear story. As you can tell, we're not setting this in any modern time. This is actually 1600 Denmark. So what was important for us was to make sure that the relationships were clear, and the relationships that we know in our everyday life. A son whose father has died. He has an uncle who marries his mother. These are relationships that we know, so we set out to tell a very clear story about the family relationships. It's a very domestic play. So as you can tell, it's set in one location in a home. So that was what was important to us before trying to set it in a modern day. It was more important to us about telling the clear relationships.
Very cool. Fairhaven, let's go to you guys. A thought about Hamlet, something you know about the play you'd like to share, or a burning question to start with?
I think you've dumbfounded them. We did a production of canned Hamlet, which is a goofy version of Hamlet. And but we know that the real Hamlet, even though it's mostly considered dark, has elements of humor in it. Do you guys play those up, or do you tone them down?
Oh, there's a very good question.
Oh yeah, there's absolutely humor in this. There, you know, with the characters of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two people that no one quite gets their names right. No one knows who's Rosencrantz or Guildenstern throughout it. And of course the idea
casting helps that too. I mean,
yeah.
The fact that you've cast two actors that are almost exactly the same height and type. So.
Two actors, they're about 6'5", 6'6", and extremely slender guys. They look very similar to each other, but we play up the humor throughout. I mean, Hamlet is a very smart man, and he's very funny with the wordplay that he does, with the character of Polonius, who continues to talk and talk and talk and talk. Oh, we play that up, yeah.
Very cool.
You can't do something that's unfunny. It's very funny, so.
Very cool. Let's go to Beaver Falls. Beaver Falls, a question from you guys right now, or something you'd want to share right from the beginning?
Yes, as I told you, these are fifth graders, so they're learning for the first time. In a synopsis, very quickly, could you tell them what Hamlet is about? You know, what it starts out and what it ends up to be, so they can understand it?
Yes, we'll be happy to. We may or may not want to give the ending away yet, but we're talking about a story where a young man's father has died. And that young man's father was the king of Denmark.
Right.
And he finds out that indeed his uncle, who's become king, ends up marrying his mother. And there's a rather important event at the beginning of the play where the ghost of Hamlet's father appears to him, and Rick, I'll let you or Chris take over from there.
Sure, we can try to tag team this. Yeah, Hamlet's father appears to him as a ghost and says, "I was murdered." And so that sets off a series of events where Hamlet sets out to revenge his father's death.
And he's throughout the play trying to decide to be active about that. He is wondering whether he should, because he feels very sad and he's grieving about the circumstances, he thinks, well, maybe I should end my own life, or maybe I should kill the man who killed my father, and he struggles with that throughout the play. At one point, he's talking with his mother, and they're arguing about the fact that she's married his uncle, and he hears a noise and he thinks it's the king, and he stabs behind a curtain and it turns out to be somebody else.
So there's a lot of mistakes that happen,
Yes.
and to some extent those mistakes may be because of Hamlet's inability to act quickly. He's constantly trying to determine what it is he wants to do. So there's a lot of starts and stops in the play. There's a multitude of characters. You meet college students, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, your college student buddies, so to speak, of Hamlet. Obviously, Polonius is an important character who's the king's advisor. He has a son named Laertes. And obviously, vengeance and revenge plays a big important part in the play, both Hamlet's vengeance of his father's death, but once Laertes' dad, Polonius, is killed by Hamlet, then Laertes wants to revenge his father's death. So you have a lot of give and take with that. There's some violence, there's some bloodshed, there's some good sword play. And at the end, I don't know that I would say everybody dies, but a significant amount of the character dies. And I guess so you guys know at the end, Hamlet dies too in a very dramatic sword fight. Let's talk about the nature of his character, because we want to really spend some time about Hamlet today. There's all sorts of different interpretations of this guy. And so, like, how does an actor, you guys are actors, how do you think about approaching the role? Like, are different interpretations equally fine in the sense, like, is he like just this really kind of like, gee, I don't know what to do guy, I'm just so laid back, I can't figure out? Or is he like a deliberate man, or is he like I mean, there are interpretations that say he's somewhat deranged.
Well, one of the great things that Shakespeare does as a playwright is he leaves a lot of questions open to interpretation. And one of the major questions in the play, because they talk about Hamlet acting as if he's crazy. And one of the decisions a production needs to make is whether Hamlet, because of his grief, because of his inner turmoil, is actually going crazy, or is he pretending that to confuse the issue so that he can decide whether he's going to seek revenge and actually kill his uncle. So there's that decision to make, and it changes the interpretation of the play.
And go ahead.
As an actor and a director, you want to make the choice that people are going to want to watch for 3 hours too. What is the interesting choice? If you make a choice, well, he's just crazy, how can you maintain crazy for 3 hours? And do people just kind of get tired of it? Our production, we're specific, you know, the director and the actor have made specific choices of what our production is. What's more important to them, though, is that the audience can make a decision for themselves of what they think Hamlet is going through. But I would say, I mean, he's a very intelligent person. He is weaving his way through this home, through all this series of events that happen. He's very smart throughout them.
We're going to begin to investigate the text a little bit, but before we begin to look at the famous To Be or Not To Be soliloquy, which, if you had the chance to get the copy in advance, you would have a copy in front of you, or open up your copy of Shakespeare. We also have that script we're going to bring on the screen as we read through it. We're going to get to that soliloquy and start to talk about the text. But let's go to another round of questions first. Holt, another question from you guys about the play or anything?
We'd like to ask about the challenges of working with an outside production as opposed to an indoor production.
Oh, well, one of them is obviously happening today. And Green, thanks very much. I didn't realize you'd made it into the bridge yet, so we'll come to you right after we finish this question from Holt.
Well, the challenges of outdoors, there's no roof. There's no roof, there's no air conditioning, there's no heat when it gets cold. And everything, the elements are, you're subject to the elements. The lighting is out in the rain. If it starts raining, we have to bag all the instruments. The set, if it starts to rain, the set gets wet. Well, we have to mop down. We have, for this production, the costumes are very elaborate. So if they get wet, they're already 20 pounds. If they get wet, they're 30, 50 pounds. So there are a lot of elements, and of course taking care of actors. As the sun goes down at night, it gets colder outside. They have to be aware of how they're working as actors outdoors. Of course, you know, we're in a state park, but there are animals as well. You can't control where birds land. You can't control where nature takes its course. So, yeah, a lot of uncontrollable things.
One of the things that the festival has done over 10 years is to make improvements in this area, which is also called now Shakespeare Glen. And in previous years, when rain would fall, we'd have lots of problems with mud and the audience becoming messy. And what happens now is that there's drainage underneath this wonderful hill, so that the grass stays much more dry when it rains. There's also electricity drawn so that we don't have to have generators that are powered by gas. So slowly but surely, we've raised the money to make this a wonderful theater space outside.
Yeah, it's become a wonderful space because I've lived the mud experience here before myself, so that's a very good thing. Green, Ohio, let's go to you guys. A question right now from Green.
Yeah. The subject of Ophelia's death has been widely interpreted by many different productions, like whether she killed herself or it was just like an accident. In your production, how does she die?
Oh, there's a very good question.
Well, she drowns. She does drown. That's the text. The text supports that she does drown. Now, how whether she means to do it or there is people that her dress got so heavy with water that it pulled her down, and that's going to leave up to how our audience interprets, particularly how this actor handles the moment before she goes away. So I want to leave that up to the audience, whether me saying it's a choice or she gets swept away.
Okay.
And the wonderful thing about having kind of a mysterious element to that decision that the audience needs to make for themselves is that the actor may carry that knowledge inside. They have made that choice inside their mind, and but to leave it open to the audience, then you have a chance to talk about it. You have a chance to talk about the character, to understand the actor's interpretation.
Very cool. Yeah. Back to Fairhaven, Vermont. Fairhaven, another question from you.
I was wondering, like, you guys have to deal with like the daylight and it turning to night. Like, so how do you do with that? Do you have like a whole light system you put up, or do you just show it during like the early afternoon so you don't have to worry about it?
That's a fantastic question, because we do have 4 light towers where we put all the lights up. But actually, that's a great question, because for the first 45 minutes of the show, we can't depend on lighting. It's because the sun is setting. But as the sun sets, we start using our lighting instruments, though.
Yes. And tomorrow, with our show we're doing here both at 10 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon, where we're talking about the production elements, we're going to go specifically into some of that. We'll talk about the lighting and how they do it, as well as costumes, building the set, etc. Let's begin to look at a specific part of the text. And so, and let's begin to go through this. Chris, Rick, who would like to do a little bit of reading here and talk as we go through the to be or not to be moment? Now, this is obviously happening when in the play?
This is right as Polonius and Claudius have decided to spy on Hamlet to see whether his insanity is really a cause of his love for Ophelia. And he comes in and he says, "To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life." You want to keep going?
That's great. That's fabulous. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much. Well, tell me, actually, no, I don't want to do this yet. I'm going to ask students for their reaction to what they just heard from you. All right, let's start first of all with Holt. Based on the way Chris read that piece, what sense do you get about what Hamlet's doing? What sense do you get about Hamlet's motivation? What sense do you get about, Hamlet's thought process there? What's the process there? What's an idea you've got, Holt?
We feel as though he's like in despair, as if he's pondering his own death and wondering about what comes after his death.
Okay, very good. That's very
suicide.
Right, whether he's going to commit suicide or not, what's the likelihood of that? Green, Ohio, your thoughts?
I think he doesn't want to feel like he's insane, so he's wondering whether or not to commit suicide.
Okay, very nice, interesting. Let's go to Fairhaven, Vermont. What do you think up there in the Northeast?
We think that he feels very conflicted, which turns out to be his tragic flaw.
Ah, yes, conflict is a problem for him, most definitely. Beaver Falls, any thoughts from you guys? You just keep thinking, we'll come back to you, don't worry about that. So we have some ideas there about what they're thinking of in terms of, let's talk a little bit about the nature of the script. A lot of people get hung up in what they'll say is the language of Shakespeare. Chris, when you read that, I understood exactly what was going on, both in terms of what the words you were saying as well as like a definite idea of what's happening in Hamlet's head. As an actor, how conscious are you of the fact that this is, or do you pay attention at all that this is Shakespeare, this is written a certain way, this is, you know, blank verse, this is iambic pentameter, that kind of thing? How much does the rhythm of the line of what he's writing depend upon what you want to do versus, I want to be more like, I don't know, we'll say Marlon Brando and that style of acting, and I'm going to go from the inside out kind of thing?
Well, the first thing as an actor that I consider is the fact that it's poetry, and probably the best poetry ever written for the theater. And therefore, the things about the poetry that Shakespeare is consciously trying to do are things that inform me as an actor. When Shakespeare wrote a play for his actors, they didn't get the whole script. They got what was called a side, which was their lines and the cue line. And they didn't know the story until they all got together and read the whole play. There also were very few stage directions. So all of the action, the emotion, the rhythm, the relationship in terms of how that plays out in terms of dialogue, all of that is in the text. If you look for it, it's kind of like a secret code.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the text as a code, and I try to look at all the things about the language that can tell me about the character. For example, if you think of iambic pentameter, to be or not to be, that is the que, that's an iambic line.
Mm-hmm.
Shun, it's what's called a feminine line. There's an extra beat, and there's actually 4 of those lines in a row, which tells me that Hamlet has a lot on his mind. He needs an extra beat to express everything, and he's moving forward in his thought. And then the punctuation is very important. To be or not to be, then there's a colon.
Mm-hmm.
That's a caesura. That means there's a pause. So to be or not to be, that is the question. There might be an implied pause, and that's something you can play with as an actor. So as you look at all of the little clues that Shakespeare gives you, it helps you to decide on your acting choice. Because ultimately what you need to have, first of all, is a knowledge of what every word means.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have I brought these to show you. It's
Great.
the Shakespeare Lexicon, and this has every word in the Shakespeare canon, and they're all marked by play. So if you have a question about a word, you can look it up and find out what it means and all the different times it's used. And so this and a really good dictionary are something that you have to have when you begin your work as an actor.
So later in the soliloquy, when he refers to his bare bodkin,
yes,
if I wasn't familiar with what a bodkin was, I could find it in here.
I actually have it, and I'll tell you
Chris,
what it is.
I thought we talked about that in advance.
We
Which, by the way,
didn't
we did
actually, but a bodkin, and it's very interesting. Some people say, "Oh, well, that's a knife, a knife that's unsheathed," but actually, a bodkin is, and I'll find it here, a sharp instrument to make holes by piercing.
So it doesn't have to necessarily be a knife. It could be an awl or any number of things.
An awl or something like that that was used to make clothes. Very interesting.
It's a very interesting thought. Very cool. Let's go back to more student questions. Holt High School, another question from you guys?
Based on Hamlet's soliloquy, the to be or not to be soliloquy, how do you think Hamlet feels about eternity and life after death?
Oh,
about what?
About eternity, about life after death. What do you think, Rick?
I think he's very interested. I think he contemplates it. What is the moment of release that happens when you die, and that is something that in this moment he really wants to consider. I think it's could almost be a luxury too.
Yeah.
Ah.
Well, and I think he's also trying to decide whether the sleep of death is going to be a peaceful sleep or full of nightmares. Whether killing himself will release him from all of the suffering that he feels, or whether it's going to be worse on the other side.
What dreams may come, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go back then to Fairhaven. Fairhaven, another thought from you guys?
What? You can ask us. Okay, do you have a question?
We were saying, do you think it would have been smarter if Hamlet had acted sooner rather than wait like he did and be sent away and everything? I know that's more of a hypothesis than like with the play, but
That's great. That's an intriguing question. And before we begin to answer it, let's talk about some examples of how there are stops and starts in the play here, because he does indeed take his time. First of all, obviously, there's concern at the beginning of the play whether or not this is really his father's ghost, right? And so he's got to figure that out. And then he makes the decision that it is his father's ghost. And then how am I going to act and how quickly? And then there's the moment where Claudius is praying.
Right.
And talk a little bit about that moment in the play.
He has a moment to kill Claudius, to kill the man who has murdered his father. He has that moment. And he stops the moment and says, wait, if I kill him while he's praying, that could send him straight to heaven. So he has this turmoil, a constant turmoil back and forth, which is as an actor, the way to look at it, it's particularly in To Be or Not to Be, is that everything with Hamlet is point and counterpoint. He makes one point, but then he counters himself. And he does that throughout the entire play.
Do you see that as like one of the really important things that Shakespeare is after? Because I guess one of the answers to the question would be, obviously, if Hamlet decides to act more quickly, you have a very different play, and perhaps a lot shorter. Or there'd be, the play would end up being all the ramifications of Hamlet's action. Is it in your mind that Shakespeare's really interested in a psychological study here?
Well, that's an interesting point, because he actually, with Hamlet, kind of changed what was called at his time a revenge play. A revenge play had a lot of action, had a lot of sword fights, had a lot of blood, had a lot of spectacle, and he put the action, the turmoil, inside of Hamlet's mind, which was he was allowing his audience to respond to something new, something much more layered, something much more psychological, and it was a huge hit. It was requested a lot in his time. A real successful run of a Shakespeare play was about 12 performances. And then they would go on the road during the winter to play indoors, and plays would be requested, and Hamlet was one of the ones that was most requested. So it was something that Elizabethans were hungry for, was that psychological approach to characterization. Plus, you should think too that Hamlet, when he's doing a soliloquy, he is also using as a scene partner the audience, which is different from our realistic plays of today. I mean, he really talks to the audience, shares his inner life with them, and that makes it very active. His struggle is very active.
Now, Hamlet as a character is how old?
Oh, depends on, I mean, the multitude of people that have played him. He's ranged in age from, his teens into his, men have played him in their 40s.
Oh, yeah.
In their 40s,
As Shakespeare writes him, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are his college buddies. Is Hamlet in his early 20s, do you think?
Right now, we're playing as like his early 30s.
Okay.
That's how we're playing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how much do you think that matters in terms of like the interpretation of the play, or the interpretation of how the audience sees it, in the sense that if I'm interpreting that this guy is like in his mid-20s and I'm seeing a 40-year-old play it, how important is it that how important is it you make the decision that I'm 30, I'm going to play it as a 30-year-old versus I'm 30, I'm going to play it as a 20-year-old?
I think our life experiences. I mean, if you see some kid just running around the place, well, it makes sense. This teen and his angst, and he's just creating all this havoc. But when you see someone who's in their early 30s, they have a set of experiences that they're bringing into it. It also sets forth a chain of reactions in your casting. The older your Hamlet gets, the older Gertrude gets, the older Claudius gets. And one of the interesting relationships with Hamlet and Gertrude is this mother-son relationship is very intriguing. The love they have for each other. That bedroom scene it's almost like these two people, I saw the run-through the other day, is that these two have a very deep friendship as well as a mother-son relationship. So the age sets off a course of other events.
And that, of course, and the nature of that relationship just feeds Hamlet's psychosis or conflict or tension or struggle even more, because obviously his mother has turned around and married his uncle. So that makes a difference to him. Let's go to Beaver Falls. Do you guys have a question now? If so, come on in. And Holt, we'll go back to you guys. We're going to switch in just a moment actually to a third excerpt that we sent you in advance, the advice to the actors that Hamlet gives to the player king. So if you want to pull that out, we're going to get to that in a moment. But Holt, another question from you?
In the scene where he's at the graveyard and he picks up Yorick's skull and he's like having flashbacks, what's the relevance of that to the play?
Oh. Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well.
Well, the theme of death runs throughout the play, and Hamlet is still thinking about death, his own and those he seeks his revenge upon, and actually seeing that image of the skull and thinking about life and the childhood playing that he and Yorick did gives a wonderful contrast and a wonderful thought about his musings on death.
Good question. Okay, Fairhaven, Vermont, one from you.
I guess we'll pass for right now.
That's cool. Don't worry, we'll come back to you. We want to start talking a little bit about that speech that Hamlet gives to the player king when he describes the kind of acting that he's after. And Rick, give us a setup for this moment in time. Now, Hamlet, this little troupe of actors just happens to pop by Elsinore, the castle, because they're just roaming the countryside, or were they going to come anyway for a performance? What brings this troupe to the castle?
So they've been called for entertainment, and they get there, and Hamlet gets this idea, how can I use these people to pull out what I need? And he proposes to the lead player, the player king, he proposes to him, do you know this one play, The Murder of Gonzago, do you know this? And he says, yes, yes, yes. And he says, well, could I add in some lines to this to help to tell the story this way I want to tell it? And he says, of course I'll learn these new lines for you. So Hamlet uses this as a device to get Claudius.
And to a large extent, is he using the device to, in essence, make sure for himself that Claudius did indeed kill his dad? Or is it more that I want everybody else to see Claudius's reaction so they might think something is amiss too? Or?
I think it's a little bit of both, because he sets this up in a public place. I mean, this isn't like a private moment. He sets him up. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay. Well, Chris is going to have an opportunity to read through that. We don't have the script to show you here, because this is, we want you to really think in terms of listening to the words and visualizing what it is that Hamlet's after, the kind of acting that I assume Shakespeare thinks is pretty good, or he probably wouldn't have put it in the play, Chris?
Well, there are so many references to the world being a stage in Shakespeare's plays. In fact, that was a motto over the door of the Globe, that all the world is a stage for actors. And I think that this speech directly comments on what kind of acting he liked. And he says, "Speak the speech, I pray you, as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. But if you mouth it, as many of your players do, I had as lief the town crier spoke my lines. Nor do not saw the air too much with your hand thus, but use all gently. For in the very torrent, tempest, and as I may say, the whirlwind of your passion, you must acquire and beget a temperance that may give it smoothness. Oh, it offends me to the soul to hear a robustious periwig-pated fellow tear a passion to tatters, to very rags, to split the ears of the groundlings, who, for the most part, are capable of nothing but inexplicable dumb shows and noise. I would have such a fellow whipped for o'erdoing termagant. It out-Herods Herod. Pray you, avoid it."
So he wants more subtlety than he wants bizarreness or obviousness.
Well, there were some actors in Shakespeare's time, I think, that were very large and bombastic, and because of the psychological nature of Hamlet and of his writing in general, he wanted the acting, of course it's heightened language, so there has to be some energy to it, but he wanted it to evoke the truth in life. He thinks that theater should hold a mirror up to nature, he says later in the speech. And so he's arguing against showy acting, but acting that connects with the text.
So if I was an actor in Shakespeare's day and I was attending a production of Hamlet, might I have wondered, had I been one of those showy actors, is Will actually saying I'm not good? Do you think he was referring to anybody specifically, or like, did he want actors to actually pay attention to what he was saying in addition to the context of the play?
Maybe do my play, don't do your own theatrics.
The text is king.
Yeah.
So bring to the text bring the acting to the text that makes sense for the text, not the acting to the text that you do all the time.
Well, the summary of this whole section is tell the story. Tell the story without embellishment. Let the truth of the story maintain itself. Don't distract from the truth of the story by your flamboyancy.
Now, just because of the nature, we're talking about the Globe Theater, obviously we're talking about a large audience, we're talking about the groundlings at the bottom, we're talking about people up above. Talk a little bit about what do we know about the nature of acting in Shakespeare's time? I mean, we're so used to naturalistic styles now, and especially as we watch films and television and the camera gets in real close, we're seeing, just eyes doing something and not much else. Is there a way that you would define acting style of the time? Do we think of it as much more rigid or much more larger than life than we would see today, or were they very similar in acting?
Go ahead.
Well,
what do we know?
I had a chance to go to the Globe last summer, and I was a groundling. I actually stood right at the edge of the stage. And one of the things about Shakespeare's Globe Theater is that everybody is very close to the stage. There are no microphones, and of course in Shakespeare's time there were no microphones, there was no amplification. And what I sensed when I watched a wonderful production of As You Like It was that the vibration, literal vibration of the language, of the poetry, which was resonating in these wonderfully trained actors, I could actually feel, just like you feel a bass guitar when you're at a concert, I could feel the vibration of the language. And that informed me about the play and the story just as much as intellectually understanding the language and also the blocking and the physicality of the show. It was all part of an experience. I also think Shakespeare wrote such wonderful stuff because he had wonderful actors. He must have had fabulous actors. And of course back then, since there was no recording or amplification, I think voices were naturally more settled in the body, and that the vibration of sound was one of the things that was entertaining when you went to the theater.
Very cool. Holt High School, let's go back to you guys. Another question about a specific aspect of the play or acting Shakespeare, whatever.
What is the most challenge in acting for a Shakespearean play? What is the most challenging part in getting into a character from such an old time period?
Oh, interesting. Rick?
I think reminding yourself that they're just human beings too. I think just because they're from another time period doesn't mean they didn't have the exact same feelings and emotions and wants. You know, they were just as jealous as we can be today. They can fall in love just as much as we can fall in love. They can want revenge just as much as we want revenge. That is a difficult thing of thinking this language is foreign to me, but in fact, they're relationships that we all know. You know, I keep going back to it. This is just a play about a guy who was away at college and his father was murdered. So we can all relate to that in some way.
Very good. Green, Ohio, another question or thought from you? Well, let's move on to Fairhaven, Vermont. Fairhaven, another question from you guys?
Well, we were just wondering how long it took for the whole production to actually come together as far as rehearsing and building the set.
Oh, very good question. Talk a little bit about that process, Rick.
We start working on the show at least a year in advance with identifying the director, and the director starts talking to designers. So for about 6 to 9 months, the director is working with designers. We start auditions about 4 months before we go into rehearsal. We rehearse for 4 weeks. The building of the set, we built it off-site and put it together indoors, and then we broke it apart and brought it here. The build took about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks to do all of the building. but we'll put it up in about 2 weeks outdoors.
And since you mentioned the build, we've got some video that we shot last week as the set began to be constructed, and we'll run that video. Talk a little bit about the design and the build, and who's doing it for you and that kind of thing.
Yeah, what was really important for us for this show was that because it is about relationships and it's taking place basically in one household, that we wanted there to be a lot of depth to the production, that the set wasn't, as you can tell, the set wasn't running like far left to right, but had depth to it. Because these characters have so much going on. We wanted a play space that would allow actors to have different entrances and exits, but to be able to have depth. And we wanted it to feel like it was coming at the audience. Some of our sets in the past have been a little bit, I could say flat. We wanted to feel like it was coming at the audience. We bidded out this entire project to one company called Switch, and they do big installations for stadiums and convention centers, and they do all the lighting, the sound, and they built the set.
Okay, very cool. Holt High School, back to you guys. Another question?
We were just wondering how much work is put into making sure that the fights look authentic and really realistic, because I know that one of the complaints that some people have is the language gets really confusing and it's a whole bunch of language. How much work is put into making the fight scenes look really legit, I guess?
Yeah, that's a great question. We hire a fight choreographer who choreographs the entire fight. And the fights, it's about the one big one is about a 45-second fight, and they will rehearse that for, oh my goodness, probably 20 hours worth of rehearsal for that one fight, easily. But they all learn, all the actors learn, they have swords, and they learn there's different placements for all of the sword positions, and they learn those and they choreograph a fight based on all the different sword positions. And they add a lot of yelling and screaming and jumping too. Makes it sound better.
The fight choreographer, those are all accredited teachers. They have to go through years of training in all different kinds of fighting, all different kinds of swords, hand-to-hand combat, and really what they're doing is creating a dance of danger. It has to look absolutely dangerous and thrilling, but it has to be even more safe than dancing, because they are dealing with things that can hurt you on stage.
Yeah.
Green, Ohio, back to you guys again, if you're there.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
What makes you guys so passionate? What makes you guys so passionate about Shakespeare?
Oh, there's a cool question.
What makes me so passionate? Well, for me, it is language, because, you know, Shakespeare's credited with creating over 2,000 words. It is language, because without language, you don't have ideas. And without ideas, you don't have justice and morality and ethics. That's why it's important to me, because it creates ideas. And he is, you know, he helps us, he writes stories that helps us heal as a society. Julius Caesar tells us how to deal with power and people and government. He helps us heal. That's why I'm passionate about it.
Okay.
It's also a lifelong journey. As education director, one of the things that I've been able to see is students who started working on Shakespeare when they were in grade school and now are majoring in college as Shakespeare scholars or as actors, because there's so much there to mine. There's just so much in terms of wonderful storytelling, wonderful use of language, great plot development, and the productions. If you get to see a lot of Shakespeare, and if you get to see a Shakespeare play more than one time, you see that it can be done in so many different ways because the material is so strong.
And I think that's an interesting point, because obviously one of the very questions we had at the beginning was about modernizing this play. I mean, Hamlet has been performed in all sorts of different ways. I mean, Midsummer Night's Dream and all those kinds of things. The text is what really carries it through. In essence, I can take the story and place it in all sorts of different contexts. Why the decision to make this one back in 16th century Denmark?
Well, I think for us is that we wanted to focus on telling a clear story. We didn't want to get caught up in let's do something modern, because then you kind of get caught up in that. We wanted to focus on the story first, because the story is good enough by itself. If you go to the Globe, you know, the theater is extremely simple. There's not a lot of light. There's no lighting. It's all sunlight. And the costumes are simple. We want to keep it simple, tell a clear story, not get caught up in trying to make it Hamlet in space, you know, and because then you're just watching space. You're not listening to and watching the story that has stood the test of time for 400 years, you know.
So I shouldn't see Hamlet in Star Wars or Star Wars in Hamlet.
You won't see it here.
Okay. I mean. Beaver Falls. I'm sorry. Let's go back to Fairhaven, Vermont. Fairhaven, a question from you guys.
So you were talking about like simplicity and everything. So would you say that Shakespeare's better without the frills and everything of the set and the costuming and all the stuff? Like even putting in the 16th century is still a lot of work as far as set and costumes and everything. So would you say it's better with minimal?
I would say it's totally doable minimally. It is. Don't get me wrong. I love theatrics. I love big shows. But it can be done simply, and I think it depends on, you know, it depends on your budget, depends on what you're trying to do with your audience. For us, we want to make it as accessible as possible. So for us, doing it simply like this in 1600 works.
One of the things that in Shakespeare's time they used to say, instead of I'm going to go see a play, they used to say I'm going to go hear a play. And Shakespeare's plays were done, as Rick said, very simply, without elaborate sets. All the costumes were clothes from rich patrons that they would pass down, so there were no, even Julius Caesar was done in Elizabethan costuming in Shakespeare's time. So the focus was on the words, and if you look at Shakespeare's plays carefully, you'll see that everything about the story, where you are, what people are feeling, the relationships, all of that is clearly in the text, and people would gather that and use their imaginations. Shakespeare asks you to do that, to meet the production halfway with your imagination.
That's a really good point, and a question comes to mind based on her question, and that is, as an audience member, should I approach Shakespeare differently if I'm reading it than if I'm seeing it? Do I need to be thinking of it in a different way? Like if I'm reading it and I'm more interested in the poetry, if I'm seeing it, should I just, you know?
I know for us, we try to prepare our audience as much as possible by letting them know the story, so that they know the story, they know the major plot point, so that when they're watching it, they don't have to get caught up in, I don't know what they're talking about. So we try to tell the story as much as possible to help prep them. I don't know. I'm a theater person, so I read, when I'm reading it, I'm thinking of it theatrically too.
You're visualizing.
Yeah, I'm visualizing.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible not to.
Yeah, for me. Yeah.
It takes a lot of time to read a play. And that's one of the things, you can't read a play quickly. You have to read it and close your eyes and imagine it and see it in your mind. And Shakespeare's writing is probably the best for that, because it's all there.
I want to take just a moment and look at this scene between Hamlet and Gertrude. That again, you guys got a copy of it in the materials that we sent you. But this is the famous moment where obviously he's going to stab Polonius through the curtain without realizing it. It gives us a sense of that interplay between them. Talk about where this scene happens and what's Hamlet all upset about?
Well, it's happening in his mother's bedchamber, and this is the first time we get to see them both alone and to deal with the major issue of, you have betrayed my father, your husband, and have married my uncle. It's a really vulnerable scene, opening up scene where they're getting to be very candid with each other. And there's a lot of risk in this scene. There's a lot of risk.
In terms of pace of this scene, Chris, do you see this scene as fast? Do you see this scene as more of a slow introspective, or is this like a argument?
Well, I think it's fast because of the way the language works. They're here at the beginning.
Go ahead.
Well, can we read? I'll read.
Yeah. Do you want to be Gertrude? Who wants to be?
I'll be Gertrude.
Okay. Because obviously Gertrude would have been played by a male in Shakespeare's time.
Right, absolutely.
That's right. So Hamlet comes in, and he's just come from that scene where he almost murdered Claudius, and he's been summoned. So he's already emotionally.
And Polonius is hiding.
Polonius.
Is hiding behind a curtain right now.
That'll be me.
Now, Mother, what's the matter?
Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended.
Mother, you have my father much offended.
Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue.
Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue.
Why, how now, Hamlet?
What's the matter now?
Have you forgot me?
No, by the rod, no, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife, and, would it were not so, you are my mother.
Nay then, I set those to you that can speak.
Come, come, and sit you down, and you shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you.
What wilt thou do? Wilt thou not murder me? Help, help, ho!
What, ho, help, help, help!
How now, a rat? Dead for a ducat, dead?
Oh, I am slain!
Oh me, what hast thou done?
Nay, I know not. Is it the king?
Oh, what a rash and bloody deed is this!
A bloody deed, almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother.
As kill a king?
Aye, lady, 'twas my word.
One of the things I think is really cool, for lack of a better word, about this scene is at the beginning, about how the language really helps the nature of the lines, the length of them even, and the way they mirror each other really sets the pace of like how they're going to go back and forth. Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Mother, you have my father much offended. Come, come, you answer with an idle tongue. Go, go, you question with a wicked tongue. Why, how now, Hamlet? What's the matter now? You know, it's like back and forth, really parrying back and forth. And does he want Mother to feel a little uncomfortable, get her off her guard?
Well, Hamlet's being very frank and coming right to the point. The juxtaposition of Hamlet, Mother, thou hast, you have, and then the repeat of hast thy father much offended. Anytime something repeats, there's more force to it. There's a reason that something is repeated exactly. And I think that I think it is a heightened emotional scene, and it could be played very fast. But that's a director's choice. It all depends. If you look at the there's a couple of film versions, and the Olivier version is a little bit slower than the Mel Gibson version, and the quickest is the Kenneth Branagh version, and that's just boom, 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 really, really fast. But remember also that you're in the theater, so what's important is making sure the audience hears each line and that it makes emotional sense in the terms of the rhythm that it's played.
Very cool. Let's go to final questions from each of our groups. I know we've got just a little under 5 minutes left. So Holt, a final question from you guys?
We'd like to ask, how much does a young actor, aspiring actor, have to study in order to become proficient in Shakespeare?
Oh, I think what Chris said, it's a lifelong journey. I mean, for a graduate degree, you'll train, depending on the program, they average about 2 to 3 years for your graduate degree in acting, which should have a focus in Shakespeare, but it's a lifelong journey because as you get older, you move into different roles, where you can play Romeo. 10 years from now, you're playing a different role, and then 20 years from now, and 30, it's Lear. You know, people they die playing, they start playing Hamlet, and they die playing Lear. So it's a lifelong journey because each role has a different set of experiences that it demands for you to have.
Green, Ohio, a question from you.
No more questions from this end. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fairhaven, Vermont, how about you guys?
Okay, Sydney.
We were just wondering what your requirements are for your professional company, and if any of your actors have a special, I guess, specialty in Shakespeare.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the cast. We're obviously dealing with equity actors as well as some non-equity.
We have 18 actors in the show. About 10 of them are equity and the rest are non-equity. As far as having a specialty, some of them do a lot of Shakespeare. You know, the guy playing Laertes, he just finished playing Hamlet in another production in New York, and before that he was playing Laertes somewhere else. Some people, they get it. It's in their bodies. Their bodies are built for it. Their voices are built for it. Some make careers out of doing classical work. Some dabble in it, but for us, it's really being able to handle the proficiency of the language, and it's also about the demands of the show. You know, we knew who was going to play Hamlet, as some people tell you, a lot of times it is about the look too. What do we need for the stage?
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen here in a couple of weeks so that our audience in St. Louis and anybody else who happens to be traveling in St. Louis between May 28th and like June 14th.
June 20th.
June 20th, thank you very much. Knows where to come. Okay, so talk a little bit about the basics. It opens in previews the 26th. The official opening's the 28th. Curtain time, as it were, is 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
And I'm welcome to bring out my lawn chairs, my blanket, my picnic basket, and the whole shebang?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a few chairs that are out here for rental, but it's mostly all just seating. You bring your own chairs if you want to, picnic blankets, and you spread out, find your own seat. There's no tickets.
That's right. It's totally free.
There's no
tickets. You just appear.
Yeah.
And there's a green show at 6:30, which is a wonderful celebration of community where artists from all over St. Louis visit every evening and play music. We have a 20-minute synopsis version of the show for young people and anyone who want to reacquaint themselves with the plot. We have clowns and jugglers, fire eaters. It's just a wonderful, wonderful community event that we create every evening.
Yes, we had an opportunity last year to meet one of your fire eaters, so I'll have you go to iTunes U where you'll find our archive programs, and you'll see last year where we, major heat coming out of somebody's mouth as I backed away. Didn't want the small amount of hair in my head to get singed. Any final words, 1 minute I'm being told, any final words about this play, why it matters so much, why we should care so much about Hamlet?
Well, I think it shows what this organization has come to that we're proud of. It's the greatest play in the world, and it's great to come together to share, you know, and to sit out in nature and see something so large as this play.
Chris, any final thoughts?
Hopefully it will be either the first or one of many Hamlets you see throughout your lifetime.
Very cool. Well, Rick, thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Chris,
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure.
Chris Limber, the Education Director of Shakespeare Festival, and of course, Rick Dildine, who's the Executive Director of Shakespeare Festival St. Louis. You want to come to the Shakespeare Festival? Previews May 26th and 27th. It opens on May 28th, goes through June 20th, 8 o'clock curtain time, green show in advance. Come, bring your blankets, bring your friends, have a really good evening. We'll be here tomorrow at 10 and at 1 Central Time for our show about the production elements, and we'll be live as well on the 28th at 6:30 at night here from opening night. As always, it's a pleasure to be part of your life on HEC-TV Live. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.